London must be one of the most multicultural places in the whole world. I'm here today at City University of London. There are students here from every country, every background, from every religion or non-religion, and it makes me think of the diversity within my own family. My full name is Fr Stephen Wang, and you can probably guess from the name that I come from a mixed-race family, and my parents and grandparents come from very different religious and cultural backgrounds. My Scottish grandmother was Anglican and then Catholic. My English grandfather was Methodist, then a Quaker, then he became an Anglican. My Chinese grandfather grew up in a Protestant Christian community in China, and when they emigrated to England, he settled in an Anglican parish. And my Chinese grandmother was Buddhist, and she stayed Buddhist for the whole of her life. Most families have some kind of religion somewhere in the background. But things have changed, at least in the West, over the last few decades. A recent survey found that for the first time since records began, over half of the population of the UK say that they have no kind of religious affiliation at all. These are the famous nuns, the N-O-N-E-S, the nuns. This is part of a bigger story that some people have called the death of God. People have been predicting for over 200 years that with modern science, better healthcare, public education, greater affluence, there would just be no more need for religion anymore. What's the point of praying if you've got Amazon Alexa to answer every question and deliver all your needs? But is this story really true? In reality, religious faith is growing today in most parts of the world. Globally, over 84% of the world's population say that they belong to some kind of religion. 84%, 8-4. And that percentage is actually growing, not shrinking, year on year. Now, of course, this doesn't prove that there is a God or that religions are a force for good. But I think it does prove that the question of God hasn't gone away, and that religious faith is a very real part of life for many people. A well-known book that looked at these surprising facts had the title, God is Back, God is Back. And I think it showed that religious questions are almost built into our human nature, even if people disagree wildly about the answers. Where does the world come from? What's the meaning of my life? Is there life after death? Many centuries ago, there was an Anglo-Saxon king in the north of England called Edwin. Most of the country was completely pagan at the time, but a Christian monk called Paulinus went north to meet the king and to tell him about the Christian story. Edwin honestly didn't know what to make of this, but one of his advisors, a strong northern warrior, stood up and spoke these words to his king. Your Majesty, we sit here in this hall, safe from the storm outside, with the fire to warm us. We see a sparrow fly into the hall, in one door and out the other side through another door. You can imagine a sparrow flying through this hall here now. This is what our life is like. We appear on this earth for a brief time, but we know nothing of what went before or what will come afterwards. If this Christian teaching can shed some light on the mysteries of our existence, then at the very least, we should be open to it. So this northern warrior became intrigued by the Christian story. It opened up a question that was hovering at the back of his mind. And in fact, all religions tell a story. All religions, in their different ways, are trying to answer these huge questions about God and creation and life and death. In most cultures, for most of human history, these questions have been urgent and important, and they've been at the very center of people's lives. In much of Western society today, it seems harder to ask these questions. We're more interested in the sparrow flying through the hall. We're fascinated by the beauty of this bird, but we're less interested in what lies beyond the doors. I think there is a religious hunger in many people, or maybe a spiritual hunger that hasn't quite found a language to express itself. But there's also a hesitation. These questions make us vulnerable. We're not quite sure where they will lead us. It would be strange to ignore them, but it's also risky to get them wrong. The first question, though, on which all the others depend, is much simpler and more personal, and it's this: is it worth exploring?
My father was strongly atheist, and my mother was raised in the Church of England, Anglican in Canada, but she didn't feel that she got anything from her experiences with Sunday school and with the church. So although she's spiritual and she felt that that was part of the bigger picture altogether, I don't think there was a defined religious practice in our family at all.
Both my parents were free thinkers, atheists, Buddhists.
My grandparents on my mother's side were Protestants, but they wouldn't do anything. And on my father's side, they were Catholics, and they would go to church every week.
So my parents were both Hindus. My father was a real practicing Hindu. My mother was a Hindu, but who went to Catholic convent school. So she had an interesting mixture of beliefs.
My parents were Mormon. So they joined the Mormon church when I was 2.5, and I was brought up in a very strict Mormon setting where we went to church on a Sunday and we had Mormon activities, you know, sort of probably 4 days of the week, and had all the restrictions that came with that.
If you use Facebook, you're probably sick of those stupid personality questionnaires popping into your feed every few days and the excited responses from your friends. Which celebrity are you most suited to marry? Which superhero do you most resemble? Which type of animal most mirrors your beautiful inner self? Well, here's my own questionnaire to help you work out where you are on the "what on earth do I believe" scale. First, are you a theist? There is a God. Maybe he speaks to us, maybe he doesn't, but he's definitely there somewhere. Or are you an atheist? You simply don't believe in the existence of God, full stop. Are you an agnostic? Maybe there's a God, maybe there isn't, but I'm not sure we'll ever find out this side of heaven. Or are you a somethingist? I think there must be something out there, but I haven't a clue what he, she, or it really is, and I'm not convinced it makes any difference to me anyway. Or are you a too busy and too tired to think about it-ist? Okay, maybe these questions are important, but I just don't have the energy to get into them at the moment. I'm too busy with deadlines and demands. Life gets in the way. I'm just exhausted. Now, this is just a bit of fun, but there is a serious point as well. There are so many different beliefs and non-beliefs and half-beliefs, and that's even before we get into the differences between all the religions. There are so many different reasons for people not to believe in God. And I don't just mean the deep reasons that philosophers give, although they're important and interesting. I mean the real reasons that lead people often to give up on the search for God. Sometimes it's the whole science versus religion thing, as if modern science can answer every deep human question, as if there's some kind of conflict between using your brain and believing in God. Sometimes we grow up in a family or a culture where people don't take these questions seriously. If everyone around you is indifferent to religious questions or even hostile, it takes a lot of courage to explore them. We might be afraid of not fitting in. People might think we're weird. Sometimes our images of God are so strange that it becomes almost impossible to take him seriously. If I think that God is like an old man with a beard sitting up in the cloud like Santa Claus, or an angry tyrant trying to catch me out every time I break the rules, then of course I will look elsewhere to try and find something that will give my life meaning. And in my work as a priest, I've found that there are two very common situations that often lead people to lose their faith in God or in religion. One is the experience of suffering. How can I believe in a loving God when there is so much suffering in the world? Or when I'm going through some struggle or some tragedy that seems to have no meaning? The other is the bad example of believers. Some people have had such terrible experiences of religious people. How could I possibly join this community when it seems to be full of such hypocrites, when it's done so much harm in human history, and when it still seems to be doing such harm today? There are so many good reasons to doubt the existence of God and to resist the idea of religion, genuine reasons. The problem is, even if you acknowledge these reasons, the religious questions remain. Where does everything come from? What is the meaning of my life? Why do we suffer? Is there life after death? Is there a God? Now you can criticize the bad answers, and indeed you should, but it's hard to criticize the questions themselves. I think they're universal and they won't go away. And part of the challenge is simply acknowledging their importance and being willing to explore some answers.
I think it's because life doesn't seem fair. Like, bad things happen to good people, and it's hard to reconcile that with the idea of a loving, all-knowing God.
Why would you believe in something that you can't see, can't touch, can't hear? You can't use your senses. You know, you don't see an object. I think it's the same question. Why would you believe in unicorn? Yeah.
I think it is hard to believe in the model of a God who steps in and organises things and does things, responding to events in the world. I think that the idea of we've all had friends who died of cancer, or we've seen planes go down, and the idea that there's a God who's active in the world and just lets that happen is a difficult God to believe in.
Because there's so little proof of his existence. I mean, you can think that nature is proof of God's existence, but that's just not enough. So I guess it's lack of proof.
Someone once joked, if only God would give me a clear sign, like leaving a large deposit in my name in a Swiss bank account. Well, it would be very nice, but for most people, the spiritual journey is a little bit more complicated than that. I grew up in a Christian family. My mum used to say prayers with us at bedtime, And even though the primary school I went to wasn't particularly religious, the headmaster would lead us in a prayer at the end of the school assembly each morning. But I lost whatever faith I had, and I gradually shrugged off religion, and almost unconsciously, I found that I'd become an atheist. Now, it would take a long time to explain how that young atheist came to believe in God and then came to be a Catholic priest, and I won't give you a blow-by-blow account. I was happy at school. I had a great group of friends, and I had a long list of teenage obsessions: sport, music, art, fashion. But there were nagging questions that kept coming back to me, and I couldn't find answers for them at home or at school. I had questions about the world. Where does everything come from? And I knew that science will explain one thing in terms of another. It will tell you how one thing caused another thing. But it will never tell you what is the ultimate cause of everything. As one philosopher put it, why is there something rather than nothing? I had questions about the beauty of the universe. All this goodness and beauty and order, where does it come from? What does it mean? And I know that some people will jump in and say, it's just the laws of nature, it's just science. You need to do your physics, your chemistry, your biology. And I know that's partly true. Science can explain many amazing things, but it won't tell you where did the very first, most fundamental laws of nature come from in the first place? What is their ultimate cause? And I had questions, more personal ones, about my own life. I had a kind of intuition that there must be a deeper purpose to life, a meaning that went beyond death. I couldn't put my finger on it. I just felt that we were made for something more. Sometimes I had a sense that there was a deeper mystery in the background, a light behind the curtain, especially if I visited a church or had some quiet time by myself to think. And one or two Christians I knew made a deep impression on me. They were very ordinary people, but they had a sense of peace and purpose about their lives that was very rare. I'm not saying they were saints, but there was something different about them, as if their lives somehow had been touched by God. These are the things, very gradually, that changed me. And without realizing it, I was thinking through for myself some of the classic arguments for the existence of God. People have been puzzling about these things since the dawn of time. The existence of the universe, its beauty and order, our spiritual intuitions, our longing for eternal life. Now, I'm not pretending that any of these arguments will just convince you. I've gone way too quickly. I'm just pointing out that there are some fascinating arguments and that they're worth looking into. And when you put them together, there is a kind of coherence. They're all pointing to something. They're all asking the same question, but in different ways. Is there something more? Is there something beyond the horizon? I do think there are good reasons to believe in the existence of God. I think there are good reasons, at least, for an atheist to doubt their atheism. If you don't believe, the simple fact of taking these questions seriously is an important step. You can believe that there might be a deeper mystery behind the universe, even if you're not sure what it is or how to find it.
I've kind of been stubborn, really. So I had that primary school Anglican Christianity that was there. And again, I had that attachment to the Lord's Prayer without thinking too deeply about it. But beyond that, I hadn't really set foot in a church particularly, and it wasn't until I hit my teenage years that I began thinking about God, began asking questions, began wondering what happens next. This world has always left me in awe, always, whether it's walking down a busy London street or being lucky enough to walk up an Italian mountain or even something quite, a dirty river. There's still something quite magnificent about it. This world just, never ceases to amaze me in many ways. I think the greatest thing, and another persuasive thing about the existence of God, is that literally he lives within you. So you experience God. It is that awe-inspiring for me. It's something so great that it is hard to explain, but yet you feel it. It's that feeling. It's a little bit like when talking about love. How do you explain love? Well, it's hard because it's lived and it's experienced and it branches out in so many different ways. God is like that for me. He's there. I know he's there. I can, feel him all the time. Especially when he's probably not particularly happy with me. But it's not all good, It's because God is there and because God wants us to walk towards him. We take a few twists and turns on the path sometimes, whether we've come to faith or not. It's completely natural and normal, although I'm sure we'd all rather it was a slightly better path, but it isn't. That's life. But I've always felt God was there.